Spring 1951. Asbest, a small industrial town in Sverdlovsk Oblast, deep in the heart of the Soviet Union. In the dim half-light of a basement in a brick apartment building, a middle-aged woman bent over a bound man. In her hands was an ordinary kitchen knife, the one she'd used the day before to slice bread for dinner. The man tried to scream through his gag, but only muffled rasps escaped his throat. The woman's hand did not tremble. Her movements were precise and deliberate, as if she had been preparing for this moment for many long weeks. In a few minutes, it would all be over, and the local warehouse foreman, Morozov, would lose forever what had made him a man. But to understand how a factory worker and exemplary mother had become a nocturnal avenger, we must go back 2 months. Elena Sokolova had worked at defense plant since the very beginning of the war. She was a 6th grade turner, a highly skilled machinist who operated a lathe with expert precision, a title that carried real pride in those Soviet days of industrial fervor. 42 years old, the widow of a frontline soldier killed in battle. She had raised her 19-year-old daughter, Sofia, alone. The neighbors in their communal apartment, known as a kommunalka, one of those cramped shared living spaces where multiple families divided up a single unit with thin walls and a single kitchen for all, spoke only well of them. Quiet, polite, never a quarrel. On Sundays, Elena baked cabbage pies and the aroma wafted through the entire floor. Sofia was studying at the medical college, dreaming of becoming a Feldschirr, the Soviet equivalent of a paramedic or physician's assistant who could handle everything from stitches to emergency deliveries in remote areas. Fair braids down to her waist, blue eyes, the spitting image of her father, who had died under Stalingrad when the girl was just 8. Their room in the communal flat was 20 square meters for the two of them. A stove, 2 iron beds, a table by the window where Sofia prepared for exams. On the wall hung a pre-war photograph, a young man in military uniform embracing a woman holding an infant. That was all that remained of their former life. Elena never complained. In the workshop, she was a Stakhanovite, a model worker who exceeded production quotas under the Soviet incentive system that rewarded overachievers with bonuses and public praise. Her portrait hung on the honor board. The bosses valued her. She didn't drink, didn't skip work, exceeded her quota. And in the evenings, she hurried home to cook dinner, check Sofia's homework, mend her daughter's one good dress. March turned out unusually cold that year. The snow refused to melt, even though spring had long been due by the calendar. On that Thursday, March 23rd, Sofia was late from college. They were preparing for hospital practice. Elena wasn't worried at first. Her daughter often stayed late with friends to study. But when the clock hands crept past 10 in the evening, her mother's heart began to pound with anxiety. At 11, she threw on her padded jacket and headed to the college. The building was dark. The janitor said the students had left at 6. Elena visited Sofia's friends. No one had seen her after classes. All night, the mother searched for her daughter. The police brushed her off. Who knows, a young girl might have gone off with a beau. In the morning, as dawn broke, the local janitor found Sofia in an abandoned shed behind the meat processing plant. The girl lay on a filthy tarpaulin, her dress torn, her face streaked with blood. She was alive but unresponsive to questions, staring blankly with glazed eyes. Contemporaries recalled that Elena's scream upon seeing her daughter in that state could be heard 3 blocks away. The hospital ward greeted them with the smell of carbolic acid and despair. An elderly doctor examined Sofia, shook her head, and led Elena into the corridor. The conversation was brief and terrifying. The girl had endured violence from several men. Bruises covered her body, internal injuries. Whether she could ever have children was a big question, but the worst was the psychological trauma. Sofia didn't speak, didn't cry. She just lay there, staring at the ceiling. Elena sat by her daughter's bed for 3 days without closing her eyes. On the 4th day, Sofia suddenly grabbed her hand and whispered one word: 3. Then she fell silent again. But that was enough. Something changed in the mother's eyes. The ward orderly later told investigators she had seen Elena sitting utterly still, but an icy chill emanated from her. Not anger, not rage, just a freezing, deathly cold. Investigator Dmitry Kuzmin was an experienced man. In 15 years with the militia, the Soviet term for local police, he had seen it all. But when Elena came to him with her statement, something in her voice made him listen closely. The woman spoke calmly, clearly, without tears or hysterics, listing the facts: the time her daughter disappeared, the place she was found, the girl's condition. Kuzmin took notes, nodded, promised to look into it, but both knew the truth. It was a dead-end case. No witnesses. Sophia couldn't or wouldn't speak, and the town was full of demobilized men, embittered, drinking, desperate. A week later, the investigation stalled. Kuzmin tried honestly. He questioned the meat plant workers. No one had seen or heard anything. He checked local recidivists. All had alibis. Sophia still said nothing, flinching whenever a man entered the ward. Elena came to the station every day, and every day Kuzmin spread his hands helplessly. On the 10th day, he set it straight. "You understand, Elena, without your daughter's testimony, we can do nothing. And even if she spoke, you know how these cases get handled here? Sloppy, especially if people with positions are involved." That was the first hint. Elena nodded silently and left. But that same evening came a breakthrough. Sophia spoke, not to the doctors or the investigator, but to her mother. In whispers, interrupted by sobs, she recounted what she remembered. After college, Morozov had approached her, the warehouse foreman from the meat plant. He offered her a ride in a passing truck. Sophia knew him, a respectable man. His wife worked at the town committee, the local branch of the Communist Party that oversaw everything from elections to ration distributions. In the truck were two others, a young man, Alyosha Volkov, son of the local department store director, and a third she didn't know, but she remembered the scar across his cheek and the tattoo on his hand. After that, Sophia remembered little. They drugged her somehow. She woke in the shed. There comes a moment in a person's life when something inside breaks irreparably. For Elena Sokolova, that moment didn't arrive right away. Not that terrible night when they found Sophia, nor in the hospital when the doctor shook her head. Not even when her daughter whispered, 3. Number. The breaking point came on the 10th day after the tragedy, and no one knew about it except Elena herself. She sat in the factory canteen during lunch break, mechanically chewing black bread with herring, tasting nothing. At the next table, men from the foundry shop sat, talking loudly, laughing. Suddenly, one of them, a young fellow, told a joke about a girl and 3 men. The details were vile, but everyone laughed. "The fool had it coming," someone added. And then Elena heard her own voice, calm and even. "And if it were your daughter, Morozov?" Silence fell over the canteen. Everyone knew about the Sokolovs' misfortune. The young man flushed, muttered something about it being different. Elena stood, approached him closely. In her hand was a table knife, dull, serrated. She placed it on the table before him. "Look, it's a dull knife. Even bread is hard to cut with it. But if you try hard enough, if you have time and will..." She took a piece of boiled meat from her plate and began to slice it slowly, methodically. The blunt blade tore the fibers, but Elena continued. "You can cut off anything. It just takes longer and hurts more." No one moved. Elena finished cutting the meat, wiped the knife on a napkin, set it back, and sat to finish her lunch. The men at the next table rose hastily and left. From that day on, no one told such jokes in her presence. But the real turning point came that night. Elena hadn't slept for 3 days straight. She sat in the kitchen, sipping cold tea, thinking. At some point, she rose, went to the cupboard, and pulled out an old photo album, wartime years. There she was, young, at her lathe, turning shells, with friends at a cleanup day. And that photograph she had hidden even from her husband. A group of women in padded jackets, all with serious faces. The factory's underground cell, in case of occupation. They had been taught many things: sabotage, surveillance, eliminating sentries. If the enemy comes, you must be ready for anything. The instructor from the NKVD, the Soviet secret police known as the People's Commissariat for Internal Affairs, infamous for its iron-fisted control and purges, had said. The enemy hadn't come then, but he had now. Only this was no external foe in Wehrmacht uniform. These were their own, Soviets, who had dared to touch her daughter, and Elena understood. She was ready. All those skills, dormant for 15 years, suddenly awoke. How to follow unseen, how to choose a spot, how to silence a victim, how to inflict maximum damage while leaving them alive. That was the hardest, but they had been taught that too. She took a small notebook from the album, hidden between the pages, the cipher they had used in the group. She began writing a plan. Not an emotional impulse, but a cold, calculated military operation. Targets: Morozov, Volkov, the unknown third. Objective: maximum retribution. Condition: remain free to support Sofia. Neighbor Tatiana Petrova later told investigators she had seen something strange that night. Elena stood by the window until dawn, motionless as a statue. I thought she was praying for her girl, but Elena wasn't praying. She was transforming. From a victim of circumstance into a hunter. From a grief-stricken mother into a machine of vengeance. Elena listened to her daughter, and with every word, something inside her hardened to stone. 3 names, or rather 2 names and signs of the third. Morozov, warehouse foreman at the meat plant, 45, wife in the party town committee. Volkov Alexei, 23, only son of the department store director, known playboy and drunkard, and the unknown with the scar. Elena memorized every detail. After the talk, she kissed her daughter's forehead, said everything would be fine, and went home. But at home, she didn't go to bed. She sat at the table and began to write, methodically, in neat handwriting, as if filing a production report. The next day, Elena went back to investigator Kuzmin and named the men. Kuzmin winced, shook his head. Elena Alexeyevna, you understand who you're accusing. Morozov's wife is in the party committee. Old Volkov supplies half the town with goods. Without proof, I can't even call them in for questioning. And your daughter's words? Sorry, but in her state, any lawyer would call it the ravings of a traumatized mind. Elena was silent, then asked directly, so nothing will happen? Kuzmin looked away. I'll try, but I can't promise. Elena left the station and headed not home, but to the meat plant. She knew where it was. Everyone in town did. A massive gray building on the outskirts. The smell of blood and fat carried for a kilometer. At the gate, she stopped, lit a cigarette. She had started smoking during the war, working 12-hour shifts in the shop. Now she smoked rarely, but a pack of Belomors, those cheap, strong Soviet cigarettes made mostly of Makorka tobacco, always lay in her padded jacket pocket. She stood there for an hour, observing. At 5, the workers streamed out. Morozov left at 5:30, heavy-set, balding, in a good coat. He got into a black Victory, a sturdy Soviet car model, the pride of the post-war auto industry, and drove off. For the next 2 weeks, Elena lived a strange double life. By day, she worked in the shop, visited her daughter in the hospital, cooked, chatted with neighbors. No one noticed the change, except perhaps that she had grown quieter. But that was understandable. She was grieving for her girl. But in the evenings, she roamed the town. Not just walking, she studied Morozov's route from the plant to home, Volkov's routine, searched for the scarred third. She found him after 10 days. Boris Nikitin, demobilized sergeant, loader at the same meat plant. April brought a thaw and the first retribution. Elena chose Morozov not by chance. He was the most cautious, the slyest. Start with the others and he might get scared, vanish, or worse, strike back. For 2 weeks, she studied his habits. Morozov lived methodically. Home, work, sometimes the beer hall, home. On Wednesdays, his wife went to the district committee for meetings and stayed overnight. On those days, Morozov let loose, drank more than usual, sometimes brought women. Wednesday, April 19th. Elena took the day off from work, said she needed to go to the hospital for her daughter, but she didn't go to the hospital. All day, she prepared. She checked the knife, Ordinary, kitchen, sharp. Prepared rope, gag, a bottle of chloroform obtained through a nurse friend for the home medicine cabinet. In the evening, she dressed inconspicuously, old coat, scarf low over her eyes, knife and bottle in her pocket. Morozov left the beer hall at 10, staggering, whistling something cheerful, 3 blocks to home through a vacant lot. Elena knew he always cut through there. The lot was dark. Street lamps had been broken since winter. She waited by the abandoned shed, the very one where they found Sofia. Symbolic, she thought. When Morozov drew level, she called softly, "Comrade Morozov, please help." He stopped, squinted into the dark. Elena approached closer, holding the scarf to her face as if crying. "My kitten's stuck under the boards here, meowing so pitifully, and I can't get it out alone." Morozov was drunk and benevolent. Besides, the voice seemed familiar. A woman from the factory, maybe. Reluctantly, he followed her to the shed. Elena pointed to a gap between the boards. "There, hear it?" Morozov bent to listen. In that instant, she pressed the chloroform-soaked rag to his face. He jerked, tried to break free, but Elena held firm. Years at the lathe had given her strong arms. In a minute, Morozov went limp. She dragged him into the shed, the same spot where her daughter had lain a month before. Bound his hands and feet with the rope bought at the market the day before, stuffed the gag in his mouth, sat beside him, and waited for him to wake. It didn't take long. 20 minutes. Morozov opened his eyes, tried to move, realized he was tied. Fear flashed in his eyes, then rage. He tried to speak through the gag, but only mooed. Elena squatted beside him so he could see her face. "Recognize me, Comrade Morozov?" Elena Sokolova, turner at plant 217, mother of Sofia Sokolova, the very girl you and your friends. She didn't finish. No need. Morozov's dilated pupils told her he remembered everything. "You know, I could kill you, but death is too easy. You must live and remember. Live, but never be a man again." What happened next forever changed not only Morozov's life, but the entire town. Elena acted with the cold methodicalness of someone who had long planned every step. She didn't rush. After all, she had time, the whole night ahead, and no one would miss Morozov until morning. His wife was at the district committee. Neighbors were used to his drunken escapades. Perfect conditions for retribution. Contemporaries later recounted that night in different ways. Some claimed to have seen a strange figure in men's clothes near the old shed. Others heard muffled sounds like groans. But on a festive night when half the town was merry, no one paid it mind. And in the morning, the town woke changed. The meat plant watchman, Boris Nikitin, found Morozov at 6 a.m. The old man was opening the gates when he heard odd noises from the shed. The door was ajar. Unusual. It should have been locked since that incident a month ago. Boris Nikitin peered in and nearly collapsed at the sight. Morozov lay on the same filthy tarpaulin where the girl had been found. He was alive. But the ambulance doctor who arrived took a long time to compose himself. In 10 years, he had seen many injuries, industrial, domestic, criminal. But this was no ordinary mutilation. Too neat, too professional, as if done by a surgeon, not a street thug. The wound was treated with iodine, a crude but effective bandage applied. Whoever did this clearly didn't want the victim to die from blood loss. Morozov spent 2 weeks in the hospital. For the first 3 days, he said nothing. Couldn't or wouldn't. The doctors couldn't tell. To all police questions, he just shook his head and indicated he remembered nothing. Kuzmin visited 3 times. On the third, when they were alone in the ward, Morozov suddenly grabbed his hand and croaked, "Don't look. No need. It was my fault." Kuzmin stared into his eyes a long time, then nodded and left. In the report, he wrote, "The victim does not remember the circumstances, cannot identify the attackers." But the town buzzed like a disturbed hive. Rumors spread faster than official news. They said Morozov had been deprived of his manhood, that it was revenge for some girl, that he was no longer a man. Morozov's wife, Natalia Morozova, a prominent woman from the town committee, tried to hush it up. But how do you contain such a thing? especially when nurses whispered in corners and orderlies carried details to every communal flat. In those days, Elena lived her usual life. Mornings to the factory, evenings to the hospital for Sophia. Her daughter was improving, could get up, take her first steps down the corridor. The doctors said she'd recover physically. The psyche would be harder, but there was progress. Sophia started talking, even smiled sometimes, though she still flinched at the sight of men and clung to her mother. "Mom, what happened to him?" Sophia asked once. Elena knew who she meant. "I don't know, darling. They say there was a fight. He's in the hospital." Sophia was silent a long time, then said quietly, "Good." And the topic didn't come up again. But sometimes Elena caught a strange look from her daughter, half fearful, half knowing, as if Sophia suspected something but was afraid to ask outright. Alexei Volkov lived in blissful ignorance for a full week after the Morozov incident. His father, the department store director, shielded his only son from bad news, and Alyosha himself paid little heed to the fate of a drinking buddy. So what if the foreman got cut up in a drunken brawl? It happens. The young man continued his dissolute life, sleeping days, carousing in beer halls nights, boasting to friends of his exploits. It was in one such beer hall that Elena heard what finally steeled her resolve. She had ducked in by chance, returning from the hospital as rain started. She decided to wait it out. She sat in the corner, ordered tea. At the next table, a group of young men, Volkov among them, already well lubricated, talked loudly without shame. "Remember that college girl a month ago?" One snickered. Alyosha grinned smugly. "How could I forget? Such a quiet little thing. She could barely scream. Morozov said later we should have finished her off, but I said, let her live. No one will believe her anyway. Dad'll hush it up. He has connections." Elena gripped her tea glass so tightly her knuckles whitened. Inside, everything turned to ice. Not just unrepentant, he boasted, took pride, saw it as a feat. In that moment, the last doubts vanished. With Morozov, she had wavered. Was it too cruel? Now she knew. They all must answer. May 2nd, a holiday. The whole town reveled, drank, made merry. Perfect timing. Everyone relaxed, attention dulled. Police busy with drunks in the center. Elena prepared for 3 days. Studied the bathhouse schedule where Volkov went Tuesdays. Checked an abandoned house on the outskirts. Basement with thick walls, far from homes. Gathered supplies. Stronger rope, firmer gag, more chloroform, and something else. Her late husband's straight razor, honed to razor sharpness. That evening, as Volkov emerged from the bathhouse, steamed and content, Elena waited in the alley. Men's clothes, cap low over her eyes, slouched gait. An ordinary tipsy worker, one of hundreds on a holiday. The young man didn't notice the figure trailing him. Why would he? He was the department store director's son. Who would dare touch him? The blow was precise, to the base of the skull, as taught in the war, not to kill, but to knock out cold. Volkov crumpled like a felled tree. Elena quickly dragged him behind the shed, pressed the chloroform rag to his face. Then, the hardest part, hauling him to the basement. The boy was young, sturdy, 80 kilos, but Elena managed. Years at the lathe had built her strength. Rage gave endurance. Volkov woke an hour later. The first thing he saw was a woman in men's clothes, sitting opposite on a crate. A kerosene lamp cast dancing shadows on the basement walls. He tried to move, hands and feet bound. Tried to shout, gag in his mouth. And then he recognized her. Despite the clothes, despite the gloom, the mother of that girl. Terror, animal terror, filled Alyosha's eyes. "Hello, Alexei." Elena's voice was calm, almost tender. "I thought long about what to do with you. With Morozov, it was simple. He's old. It doesn't matter to him anymore. But you're young. You had your whole life ahead. Had." She drew the razor, unfolded it slowly. The blade gleamed in the lamplight. "You know what I heard in the beer hall yesterday? How you bragged, how you laughed. My daughter still wakes screaming at night. And you laugh? Alexei Volkov howled like a wounded beast through the gag. Tears and snot streamed down his face. He thrashed in his bonds until the ropes cut into his wrists, drawing blood. But Elena was inexorable. She worked slowly, methodically, with the same precision she turned parts at her lathe. Only now the material was not steel, but the living flesh of one who had dared touch her daughter. "You know what's worst?" she said as she worked. "You didn't even see it as a crime. For you, it was fun, entertainment, like stepping into a joke. Morozov boasted about it at work for a week. What a hero he was. And you thought you had the right because your dad's the director, because everything can be bought, hushed up." The procedure took longer than with Morozov. Volkov was younger, tougher, resisted in desperation. Twice he nearly broke free, forcing Elena to use chloroform again. By morning, it was done. The boy lay on the cold basement floor, tied to a pipe, alive, but never to be the same. Elena left him there, first ensuring the bleeding was stanched. Not for mercy. She wanted him to live and remember. They found young Volkov only a day later. His father grew worried when the boy didn't come home for the second night. They mobilized the police, searched his usual haunts. The same janitor who swept near the abandoned houses found him, heard moans from the basement, went down to look. What he saw made the old man bolt outside and vomit into the ditch. The department store director, Senior Volkov, raced to the hospital in his official Volga, a sleek Soviet luxury car reserved for party elites and officials. The doctors met him with grim faces. Yes, he'd live. Yes, physically, he'd recover. But Volkov Sr., a burly man with a bulldog face, sank into a chair and wept. Not just wept, he sobbed like a child. His only son, heir, lines continuer. Now there would never be grandchildren. The town hummed like a disturbed hive. 2 cases in 2 weeks. This was no coincidence. It was a pattern. Someone was systematically avenging, but whom? For what? Investigator Kuzmin, of course, connected the cases. Morozov and Volkov were friends, often drank together. Perhaps common enemies, common sins. Kuzmin visited Volkov in the hospital. The young man lay under an IV, pale as a sheet. He answered questions reluctantly, muddled his testimony. First, 3 unknowns attacked him, then a woman. Then again, he remembered nothing, all fog. Kuzmin fixed him with a long look and asked bluntly, "Remember Sofia Sokolova, the med college student?" Volkov jerked like he'd been shocked. Terror flashed in his eyes. "Don't know any Sokolova," he rasped, turning to the wall. Kuzmin got nothing more from him, but the investigator didn't need more. He understood, or rather, understood the main thing. These 2 had gotten what they deserved, and somewhere in the town walked another, awaiting their turn. In those days, Elena behaved impeccably, worked overtime. "Gotta meet the plan," she said, echoing the Soviet mantra of fulfilling the 5-year plan's production targets. Visited Sofia in the hospital daily with treats. Baked pies one day, brewed compote the next. The nurses cooed. What a caring mother. With communal neighbors, she discussed the awful news. Heard about Volkov? Horror. They say it's the same as with Morozov. Maybe some maniacs loose? Sofia, meanwhile, was mending. She could walk the ward now, even venture into the corridor. Physical wounds healed. The psyche was trickier. She still flinched at sharp sounds, feared being alone, especially in the dark. But progress came. She resumed reading her medical textbooks, brought by her mother. "I want to go back to studies, Mom. I can't fear forever." The third participant in that terrible evening, Boris Nikitin, lived on the town's other end, in a demobilized barracks. Those utilitarian wooden barracks built hastily for returning soldiers, now serving as cheap housing for the working class. The scar across his left cheek came in 43 under Kursk, an artillery shard from one of the war's bloodiest battles. The hand tattoo, army work, done in hospital from boredom. After the war, he loaded at the meat plant, drank like hell, like many Frontovics. veterans of the front lines, who couldn't find themselves in peacetime. He learned of the Morozov and Volkov incidents late. No newspapers in the barracks, rumors traveled slow, but when they reached him, neighbors said Boris didn't leave his cubby for 3 days. Then he emerged sober, for the first time in months, and headed to the station. Meant to flee, probably, but no tickets, or money, or courage. He returned, grew cautious, straight home after shifts, no more beer halls, locked all locks evenings. Elena tracked him longest. Nikitin was the toughest. A Frontovic, habituated to danger, sensing it in his gut. He seemed to know he was watched, changed routes, glanced back, sometimes doubled sharply into an alley to check for tails. But Elena was patient. She waited 3 weeks, observed, noted, analyzed, and found the weak spot. Sundays, Nikitin went to the cemetery, visited his mother's grave. She'd died while he fought. That was the only day he relaxed. Drank right there by the fence, sat hours talking to the dead woman, sometimes wept. It was strange to see this rough man with the scarred face crying over an old grave, begging forgiveness for something. Sunday, May 21st. A cloudy day, fine rain drizzling. The cemetery was deserted. Weather didn't invite strolls among tombs. Nikitin arrived as usual with a bottle of vodka and black bread chunk. Sat on the old bench by his mother's grave, poured vodka into a faceted glass, those iconic thick Soviet glasses etched with diamond patterns, drank, ate, began his usual monologue. "Forgive me, Mom, I messed up again. Didn't mean to. It just happened." Morozov egged me on, said, "Simple girl, no one'll know." Elena stood behind an old oak 10 meters off, listening. Every word stabbed her heart like a hot needle. So he hadn't meant to, had doubts, but did it anyway. Followed his pals like a sheep, and now repented to a dead mother. As if that changed anything. As if it restored Sophia's stolen life, erased innocence, mended a shattered future. She approached quietly while he poured his third. No need for chloroform, Nikitin was drunk, but the knife was with her, just in case. "Boris Nikitin," she called. He turned, squinting through rain and haze, saw a woman in a black headscarf, face indistinct. "What do you want?" he grumbled. "To talk about Sofia Sokolova." Nikitin sobered instantly, jumped up, staggered, clutched the fence. "Don't know any," he started, but Elena cut in. "You know, you just confessed to your mother. Think the dead forgive what the living won't?" Nikitin stared, realization dawning slowly. "You're her mother?" he rasped. Elena nodded. "Kill me?" he asked simply, soldier-like, no hysteria. "No. Death's mercy. You'll live, but differently." Nikitin gave a crooked smile. Like Morozov and Alyosha? Elena didn't answer, just looked, and in that gaze was more terror than words. What followed became the most dramatic episode of the whole saga. Unlike his accomplices, Nikitin didn't resist, didn't flee or fight. He sank slowly back onto the bench, poured more vodka, downed it in one. Then looked at Elena and said what she hadn't expected. "Do what you want. I earned it." Elena faltered. She had prepared for struggle, resistance, force, but not this, not submission. "Conscience woke?" she asked bitterly. Nikitin shook his head. It never slept, just drowned it in vodka. Every day since that night, you know how she screamed? "Your daughter?" So quiet through the gag. I've seen horrors on the front, but that was worse. Why didn't I stop them? Elena's voice trembled for the first time. "Why didn't you help her?" Nikitin shrugged. "Coward. Drunken coward." Morozov said, "She's nobody, factory girl. And he's foreman, has pull." Alyosha just laughed. "Dad'll bury any mess." And I just stood and watched, then couldn't stop myself. War beat the man out of me, left a beast. They sat in the rain, woman in black and scarred Frontovic, two souls broken by war and life. At last, Elena stood. "Come." Nikitin rose obediently. Where? You'll see. They walked the cemetery in silence. Rain strengthened, turning paths to muddy streams. At the gate, Elena stopped. You can run. I won't chase. Leave town, vanish. But if I stay? Nikitin shook his head. Nowhere to run, no point. Do what you must. And they went on, to that very shed where it all began. Elena didn't bind him. No need. Nikitin lay on the filthy tarpaulin himself, closed his eyes himself. Just quick, he asked. No, Elena replied. You must feel at least part of what she felt. The procedure took less time than with the others, not because Elena hurried or pitied him. Simply, Nikitin didn't resist. He lay silent, only groaning dully through clenched teeth now and then. When it was over, he opened his eyes and looked at Elena. In his gaze was almost gratitude. Now we're even, he rasped. No, she said. Such things aren't evened, but the debt's partly paid. They found Nikitin there next morning, but unlike the others, he crawled to the road himself, flagged down the first cart. In the hospital, he told the doctor straight, fair punishment. I earned it. To the police, he refused to speak outright. Kuzmin came 3 times, but Nikitin clammed up like a partisan, a Soviet guerrilla fighter from the war, trained to endure torture without breaking. Only once. Comrade investigator, don't search. It was right. We 3 acted worse than beasts, and got ours. After that talk, Kuzmin sat long in his office, smoking cigarette after cigarette, then called his assistant. Suspend the assault cases. No victim statements, no witnesses. File to archives. The assistant was stunned. But the clear link? Archives, I said. Kuzmin barked, and the case closed. Unofficially, quietly, but closed. The last days of May passed in strange, tense hush. The town seemed to hold its breath. Everyone knew what happened, but no one said it aloud. Whispers in corners, knowing glances when those 3 came up. Women eyed men with new expressions, warning or triumphant. Men grew cautious, politer, especially with young girls. Elena continued her measured life. Work, hospital, home. Only now, when she walked the street, people parted. Not overtly, not showily, but they did. In the shop, greetings shifted. Respect mixed with fear. The shift foreman, once barking at the women, now addressed her only politely. Elena Alexeyevna, could you... She pretended not to notice the change. Sophia was discharged in early June. Thinner, paler, but able to smile. Elena brought her home by taxi, a rare luxury for a simple worker in those ration times. Communal neighbors greeted reserved but warmly. Old Tatiana Petrova baked a pie. The Nikitin family gave fabric for a dress. All avoided Sophia's eyes, but she sought no glances. For the first week home, the girl barely left the room, sat by the window with a book, watching the street. Elena didn't push, didn't rush. New time was needed, much time. On the 2nd week, Sophia went to the store for bread. On the 3rd, to the college, talked restoration with teachers. Slowly, cautiously, like learning to walk after grave illness, she returned to life. One evening over kitchen tea, Sophia suddenly asked, Mom, what about them? The 3. Elena sipped calmly from her mug. They say they were attacked. All 3 in hospital, but they'll live. Sophia was silent, long, crumbling bread. They can't now. The question hung. Can't? Elena confirmed. Never. Sophia nodded and dropped the topic. But that night, Elena heard her daughter cry into the pillow, not from fear or pain. These were different tears, relief, as if a massive stone had rolled from her soul. Morning, Sophia smiled genuinely for the first time in 3 months, not forced. Mom, I want to go back to studies, become a doctor, help people. Elena hugged her. Of course, darling. You'll be a wonderful doctor. Then came the unforeseen. Mid-June, investigator Kuzmin came to Elena, not in uniform, in civilian clothes. Knocked evening as Sophia slept. Elena opened, saw him, froze. "May I come in?" Kuzmin asked softly. She stepped aside silently. They sat in the kitchen. Kuzmin was long silent, twirled an unlit cigarette, finally spoke. "I know everything, Elena Alexeyevna. Knew from the start, but no proof, and there won't be. Victims silent, no witnesses, case closed." "Why come?" Elena asked evenly. Kuzmin raised weary eyes. "To warn, no more. 3's enough. A 4th, 5th. I can't turn a blind eye. Have to act by law." Elena met his gaze unblinking. "No more." There were only 3. Kuzmin nodded, rose. At the door, turned. "You know, I have a daughter too. 15. I'd probably do the same." And left, closing the door softly. June melted into July, bringing sultry nights and uneasy rumors. The town lived in 2 parallel realities. In the official one, nothing happened. 3 separate assaults by unknown hooligans. Cases closed for lack of evidence. In the other, in kitchen talks, bread queues, factory smoke breaks, everyone knew and said nothing. It was the collective silence of a whole town. Silence as complicity. Old teacher Olga Smirnova, who taught literature at the Med College, later recalled, "We all became accomplices somehow. Not to crime, no, to retribution. And it changed us. Women stopped fearing late walks from work. Men grew cautious, courteous, as if an invisible hand hung over the town, ready to punish certain deeds." Early July brought an event that could have changed everything. Volkov Sr., department store director, influential with provincial ties, came to Elena's factory. Guards stayed at the gate. He entered the shop alone, stopped at her lathe, waited till she finished her operation. Workers glanced, whispered, but none approached. All sensed something momentous. "Elena Alexeyevna." Volkov spoke quietly, but steel edged his voice. "I need to speak with you alone." Elena calmly wiped her hands on a rag, removed her apron. "To the smoking room. It's empty." They went to the small room with peeling walls where workers smoked on breaks. Volkov shut the door, faced her, and suddenly this large authoritative man dropped to his knees. "I know it was you. Know what my son did to your daughter. He confessed, to me. Not at first, but he did. I didn't come to threaten or demand. I came to beg forgiveness. For raising such a one, for not watching him, for my spoiling and indulgence turning him into a monster." Elena looked down at him. No pity, no forgiveness in her eyes. "Stand," she said coldly. "Don't humiliate yourself. Your apologies changed nothing. Your son got what he deserved. Now you'll raise him as I raise my maimed daughter. Only mine may heal in time. Yours never." Volkov rose heavily, brushed his knees. "I could destroy you," he said quietly. "I have connections, power, money. One call, you're arrested, tried, off to camps." Elena smiled faintly. "Could, but won't. Because you know I'm right, and the whole town knows. Destroy me. What'll you tell people? Defending your rapist son's honor? You're a smart man, Comrade Volkov. Sometimes silence costs more than gold." They stood face to face. Simple worker and influential director. No winner in that standoff, just 2 parents broken by their children's deeds. At last, Volkov nodded. "We're leaving. Arranged a transfer. To another province. Alyosha. He'll live under another name. Start over. Maybe it'll teach him something." He turned to the door, paused. "Your daughter, if she needs help, medical, financial, come to me. Not a bribe, an attempt to fix something." After the Volkovs left, the town exhaled. The tension hanging 2 months began to ebb, but one loose end remained: the investigation. Formally, the assault cases weren't closed, just suspended. Mid-July, a commission arrived from the province. 3 men in strict suits, Moscow accents, cold eyes. They set up in the party town committee, began summoning witnesses. First, they questioned Morozov. Already discharged but not back to work, he repeated, "Nothing remembered, no one seen, no claims." Nikitin, The only one of the trio still in town was firmer. I got my deserts. Nothing more to say. To probes for details, silence. Then they called Elena. She came in her best dress, dark blue, severe white collar. Sat straight, hands on knees, gaze calm. The commission chairman, gray-haired with colonel's epaulets under his jacket, long studied her file. Sokolova Elena Alexievna, 42, Frontovik widow, production Stakhanovite. Daughter Sokolova Sofia, 19, med college student. Victim of assault by unknowns in March this year. Correct? Correct, Elena replied. And you claim no involvement in the assaults on citizens Morozov, Volkov, and Nikitin. Elena met his eyes squarely. I have alibis for all those days. At work or hospital with my daughter. Check the log, question witnesses. The colonel nodded. We did. Formally, you're clean, but informally. Silence hung. At last, Elena spoke, weighing each word. Comrade Colonel, imagine you have a daughter, young, beautiful, with a future, and 3 scoundrels, pardon the term, 3 men rape her, maim her body and soul. The system meant to protect spreads its hands. No proof, no witnesses, and anyway, they're connected folk. What would you do? The colonel was silent, then sighed. Well, what I do doesn't matter. Law is law. Whose law? Elena asked. The one shielding rapists with pull, or the unwritten one where a mother guards her child at any cost? One commissioner, a young captain, interjected, Citizen Sokolova, you understand vigilantism is inadmissible in Soviet society? Elena turned to him. And violence against a 19-year-old girl? Is that admissible? Know what investigator Kuzmin told me? Without her testimony, no case. And she couldn't speak for a month from shock. When she did, too late. No proof. So where's your Soviet justice, comrade captain? The interrogation lasted 3 hours. Elena answered calmly, logically, without contradiction. Yes, knew all 3 by sight, small town, everyone knows everyone. No grudges before March. Yes, suspected them in her daughter's assault. No, took no actions, trusted law enforcement. To every trick question, answers backed by facts and witnesses. The commission stayed another week, questioned dozens, neighbors, colleagues, medical staff, and hit a wall of silence. No one saw, heard, knew anything. Moreover, all gave Elena glowing character. Fine mother, model worker, wouldn't hurt a fly. Saintly woman, endured so much. Even those who surely suspected kept mum. The doctor treating Morozov on wound nature. Typical drunk fight, nothing special. Though any medic would know such wounds aren't from fights. Too neat, too targeted. The nurse on duty when Volkov arrived swore she heard no ravings. She, that girl's mother, she avenged. Investigator Kuzmin was last. The colonel studied him long before the first question. Dmitry Ivanovich, you led the initial probe on the assault of citizen Sofia Sokolova. I did. And established? Crime occurred. 3 perpetrators, but without victim or witness statements, no court prospects. Unofficially? The colonel eyed him sharply. Kuzmin paused, then, unofficially, I knew who. Morozov, Volkov, Nikitin. But knowing and proving are different. And when they were attacked, linked the events? Of course, but again, no proof. Victims silent, no witnesses. What could I do? The colonel leaned back. And if proof existed? If you knew for sure it was a mother's revenge for her violated daughter? Kuzmin met his eyes. Comrade Colonel, I have 2 daughters, 15 and 17. If someone, I wouldn't wait for justice. I'd act myself. Any father, any mother would. We can talk law, vigilantism's evils forever, but some crimes law can't punish fittingly. And then, tension edged the colonel's voice. And then the ancient eye for an eye kicks in. They maimed the girl. They were maimed back. They stole her chance at normal family, children. They lost the same. Cruel, yes. Illegal, undoubtedly. Just. Each decides for self. That evening, the commission held a closed meeting. What was discussed remained secret, but next morning came the verdict. Assault cases on citizens Morozov, Volkov, and Nikitin closed for lack of crime corpus. Victims waived claims, no witnesses, no material evidence. The commission left for the province, leaving the town with its secret. Elena learned at work. Shop chief called her, announced officially. She listened silent, nodded, returned to her lathe, but her hands shook. First time in months, Elena Sokolova's hands shook not from fear, but relief. It was over. Daughter avenged, criminals punished, and she, Elena Sokolova, free to help Sofia reclaim life. Sofia Sokolova returned to med college that fall. Teachers noted her special zeal, as if making up not just lost months, but more. In 1953, she graduated with honors, entered medical institute, became an obstetrician-gynecologist. Contemporaries recalled that to Dr. Sokolova Smirnova, after marrying a widower with 2 children in 1956, women came from the whole province. She treated those other doctors shunned, helped violence victims not just medically, but psychologically. Never judged, never pried. Elena Alexeyevna worked the factory till pension, stayed 6th grade Turner though promotions offered. Refused. I'm fine as is. Died 1974, surrounded by grandchildren. Sofia bore 3 children, defying doctors' forecasts. The whole town came to her funeral. Even Boris Nikitin hobbled on crutches, by then old, ill, fully drunk, stood by the coffin, laid 3 carnations, whispered, "Forgive me, Elena Alexeyevna, and thank you." Morozov left town right after discharge. They said his wife left upon learning the truth. His trail vanished somewhere in Kazakhstan. The Volkovs vanished as if never were. Only years later emerged. Alexei worked librarian in a small Siberian settlement, married a much older woman, adopted her daughter from first marriage. Neighbors knew him as quiet, polite, never raised voice, shunned conflicts. Investigator Kuzmin rose to lieutenant colonel, headed provincial criminal investigation. In retirement, wrote memoirs, among them an unnamed chapter, just 1951. There, he pondered justice's nature, law's bounds, and how sometimes the right choice is not seeing the obvious. Manuscript failed censorship, but copies circulated among jurists for years. This story never entered official archives. No documents link Sofia Sokolova's assault to what followed, but in as best, they remember it still, passed mouth to mouth. If you found this difficult tale compelling, support the channel with a like and subscribe. Your support helps us unearth and share forgotten history pages that provoke eternal questions of good and evil, justice and retribution. Share your thoughts in the comments. What do you think of this story? See you in the next episode.